Hey, this is Mark A. Altman.
And this is Ashley Miller. And I guess we are the.
Inglorious Treksperts. And we're shipped with a missing man. Well, because
What?
literally he's out to sea.
I thought
Darren
when they declared
Doctorman.
people missing, they were like joining with V'ger or some shit.
Darren is on the Star Trek cruise, not the Star Trek Cruise, the Star Trek cruise. So next week he'll be back to give us a report on his on little buddy's trip aboard the SS Minnow. So
Nice.
We'll get to hear all about the cruise without actually having to be on it. It's perfect for me.
Yeah.
I get to hear about all the fun he had without actually being near scooters or people or anything like that. So I'm delighted. So.
Any chance to not go aboard the Enterprise?
So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing his report. I hope he
Same.
had a great time. I'm sure he did. And that'll be lovely. And there'll be a lot of great times to be had the rest of the year. Of course, we got Star Trek Las Vegas coming up in August. If you haven't gotten your tickets yet, you want to do that because it's going to be pretty spectacular. So we hope you'll join us. And then Darren and I are going to be going out to Star Trek Ticonderoga in June, and we'll be giving tours of the Enterprise. And who knows? Maybe we'll steal the Enterprise.
Yeah.
They're stealing the Enterprise.
It's not going to go very far, but
No, we couldn't get that on a flatbed truck. I'm sure if you want to see us, we'll be at the Ambrosia Diner. But I'm looking forward to that. So before we jump in, we're going to share with you today. This is wonderful, and it seems apropos. One of our panels from Star Trek Las Vegas 2025. Wonderful panel moderated by Ashley Miller on The Visitor. But before we do that, I want to just talk about what do you have you caught up yet with the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which just wrapped up?
believe it or not, I haven't.
Okay.
I know that I need to. That believe me when I say that is absolutely on my list for
You
just
could
a
knock
whole
it
host of
out in one
reasons.
day.
Yeah, it's
So
it's
good.
it seems like it's just such a sort of wonderfully unexpected departure from the usual approach.
I think that it offers an opportunity for us as Star Trek people to learn from what they've done with the Game of Thrones universe, because of course Game of Thrones was a zeitgeist defining series, and our good friend Ryan Condell did House of the Dragon. They struggled in between those shows with a bunch of pilots that didn't go anywhere and that weren't, and now it seems like rather than try and do something bigger and more elaborate and more universe defining, they went the opposite way. They did something really small and character and more intimate, and it's just wonderful. And it seems to be getting a great reaction from the from audiences, and I think that's a lesson for the powers that be with Star Trek, who can benefit from some of the things that Game of Thrones has done right and wrong at this point.
Right, like maybe you don't need to spend $25 million an episode with an 8-week shoot
Yeah.
for a show that 40 years ago would have cost you an order of magnitude less, and you would have done it in 8 days, and it would have been better. I don't know.
Maybe so. And speaking of better, really one of the great episodes, we've talked about this, of Star Trek is Deep Space Nine's The Visitor. It is an amazing meditation on loss and on fatherhood and the relationship between fathers and sons. Speaking of fathers and sons, where are you on the great Star Trek marathon with the twins?
So we just wrapped up Charlie X.
Was he your darling?
He was our darling. They I don't. I mean, they liked it. I don't think they liked it as much as the pilots or Where No Man. I mean, I'll let them speak for themselves.
Well,
but
why
I
would
do
they?
think
It's not that great episode.
they were not fans of Charlie himself.
He's a petulant whiner.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they thought. The funniest thing was, the scene where Charlie slaps Yeoman Rand on the ass, and then she kind of tells Kirk about it, and he's trying to explain to him like why you can't do that.
Yeah.
Right. So the boys were talking about that, and Locke was like, well, what's wrong with it? what's wrong with it? And Kirk was like, well, it's very inappropriate and it's rude, and you shouldn't do that to girls. And Locke throws his hands in the air from the front, right? And I'm just seeing all this in silhouette, like sort of watching like somebody's MST3K, and he just throws his hands in the air and his head back, and he goes, "But Daddy does that to Mommy all the time."
It's so funny because that's one of the few scenes I would say, there's certain things that, are kind of dated and that make me cringe occasionally, in the original series that are products of their time. Kirk basically saying it, the birds and the bees to Spock, but in Charlie X, that's one of those scenes where it's just like, but it's so interesting to hear, like, it was a teachable moment for your kids, so again, we forget that, like, when we first started watching these shows, we were kids, and a lot of these lessons about life and about growing up, we learned from Star Trek. So
that we did. And it should be said, by the way, that the scene between Kirk and Charlie was Kirk telling Charlie, that's a no-no. you don't do that.
Well, to me, the best lesson in that, the great Kirk moment to Charlie is, Charlie, in this life, there are a million things you can have and a million things you can't. And he's basically telling him, you better get, used to that because that's part of being human.
That's right.
And I love that.
Me too.
Speaking of which, I love, we've had this conversation before, but Pluto now has finally bifurcated the original series and Next Gen, which used to share a channel. So now it's a dedicated TOS channel, dedicated TNG channel, dedicated Deep Space Nine channel, Voyager, and then right now they have Enterprise running as well. And, I've said this before. I have all these on Blu-ray. But there's just something about turning on Pluto and just the jukebox. What is it going to be? And then, watching it. I mean, yesterday, man, I lucked out. It was the end of Conscience of the King.
Wow.
And so it was a floating tomb, the great Caridian. I love that.
Yeah.
I've said this many times. And then it goes right into Balance of Terror. So, and Shore Leave. And it's like, oh, man, that's just like goodness, all kinds of goodness. Sometimes I'll get like, is there in truth no beauty? And it's like, time to check out the Deep Space Nine channel. Time to check out the Next Generation channel. But I just love knowing when I don't know what to watch, just turning on Pluto, because I just finished the Joan Didion documentary on Netflix, but I'm like, okay, now it's time to turn on Pluto and see what's on the Star Trek channels.
What's funny about sitting there and watching it with them in order is I have become very aware of, at least in the first few episodes, of how many of them are about a guest star who is in one way or another all-powerful and fucks with the crew's heads.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, that happens again. Yep.
Because Squire of Gothos and the parents of Trelane are very similar to the Thasians in Charlie X, and you can sort of see very clearly when you watch this in order how the show goes from being Gene Roddenberry show to Gene Coon show. And I don't dislike. I love Gene Roddenberry show, and I mean his triumphant achievement of the Menagerie. But really, when Gene Coon comes in, it's when we're cooking with gas. And
because
it's
Roddenberry wears
show.
his interests on his sleeve, and he's clearly working something out. Man, there is a dude who has got had a very complicated relationship with God. You know what I'm saying? Like he's working a lot of it out. But
one of the things you said when you were being interviewed for our documentary, which I thought was very interesting, was you said you really see the impact of Wagon Train early on. Like Charlie X is straight up Wagon Train to the stars. We meet our guest star, we deal with the guest star's problem, and he's gone, and then we're back to our crew, because it's not about an issue we're having, it's about an issue the guest star is having, and how we help nursemaid them through those difficulties, mister. So I thought that was a very interesting observation on your part, and I filter a lot of those episodes through what you said. So
it's just fascinating to watch that, and how at some point it just became, oh yeah, you know what, we're not we're not as interested in that. And it's weird, actually, now that you say that, it's thinking about the beginning of Next Gen, where it wasn't really guest stars so much as it was like, and now here's there was a thing of the week, right? And Next Generation was kind of the weird shit of the week, or the strange culture of the week.
Yeah, yes.
Versus the guest star, and then it got away from that, and they kind of had to relearn the Gene Coon lesson. It took them a while, but they relearned.
That's so true, and I think there's probably an episode to be done on that observation that you've just made, sort of the evolution of these shows and how they kind of learn and become something else. You know, and not in that way of where people are like, oh, season 1 or season 2 are so bad. It's more like, why were they bad, and what were they trying to do that ultimately got inverted? It's
like, what show did they think they were making, and at what point did they figure out what the show actually was, and go, oh, okay, that's it, that's the show. For example, you know, with DS9, I mean, I'm pretty sure that the moment that they figured out what show they were doing, I mean, they definitely flirted with it before this, but I think the thesis statement for the show probably came in Duet, right? That was the moment. You go, oh, okay, that's the demarcation point. And I think all of the shows kind of have that. But yeah, we should totally do that.
We should, and I think it's interesting because anecdotally, you know, a lot of the feedback on this show, look, there are a lot of Star Trek fans that do Star Trek podcasts. What makes our show unique is there's no Star Trek podcast with two successful TV feature writers, you know, talk. So I think people really appreciate kind of our view of the production and writing for Star Trek because we're professionals, you know, and you know, sometimes I forget that, and it's good to offer what makes our podcast unique. I mean, we're unique for a lot of other reasons, but I'm not going to delineate those. But yeah, so that's, you know, we'll have to return to this place again. Also, I think Darren had suggested before he left on the cruise, and if he ever returns, he's like the guy on the MTA. If he ever returns, now I'm dating myself. So songs from before I was born, right? Kingston Drew, but he was saying we should do something on the evolution of that got us to Starfleet and the United Federation of Planets. How it all starts with the United Earth Space Probe, Space Command, or whatever, you know, the different episodes. Because it's really late in the first season that Gene Coon really delivers the United Federation of Planets at Starfleet, and and you'll notice that more than anybody watching these episodes now with your sons, how that, you know, the United Earth Space Probe thing goes. And I, in my headcanon, can figure it out. There are different divisions within the Federation, and Starfleet Control is sort of like the not TSA, the FAA, like, you know, the air traffic controllers is part of Starfleet. It's not really but that's all me trying to twist myself into
I like at some point, like I went through the same process, like, can I kind of reconcile this? And then I kind of said to myself, you know what, self, no, like they figured it out eventually. And in my head, I just retroactively hear them say, when it's United States Space Probe Agency, I hear them go like an ADR voice going, Starfleet.
One of the things I think that, you know, what you talked about how much the show sort of went through a chiropractic adjustment, all these shows, it's so interesting. Our episode today, we're going to be talking about The Visitor, is a great example of that, because you come off this epic Way of the Warrior introducing Michael Dorn, huge scope, Klingons are no longer our allies, we're going to war, it's a big thing. And then the episode after that, that's the great thing about Deep Space Nine, is this small, intimate little episode about a son losing his father and sacrificing everything to get him back. And it's crazy that would be the episode that follows up The Way of the Warrior. Some people would say that's a problem with the show. Other people would say that is one of the things that makes it great.
I would say the latter.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's funny because Deep Space Nine did war stories great, and it did intimate stories great. You know, and not a lot of the shows could say that. Some did one well and not the other. But man, Deep Space Nine, they could do it all. And
I feel like the reason why was because they could do war stories intimately. right?
Yeah.
Because they gave their characters room to be human beings who struggle with things. And the writing was excellent across the board, but it was particularly excellent about finding a very specific point of view and a conflict within that point of view, that the war, that all the combat stuff and the space battle shit all kind of revolved around. And by giving it some, it didn't even have to be huge continuity in all those episodes, but by giving it some context from continuity, it just helped the sense of stakes and the sense of decision, right? And it's, you're looking at something like Way of the Warrior, you're watching an episode with a character you've got a lot of history with, like Worf, and he's coming into a completely different situation in every single way. Deep Space Nine is not run like the Enterprise. Sisko is not Picard. So many things he would not have tolerated, I'm looking at you, Quark, like, are tolerated here.
Yeah.
Right? And when the Klingons say, guess what? Surprise, we're dicks. That fits thematically right in there with everything I know is wrong and the world is upside down. And now, like, everything that I think was right is maybe wrong, or it's inside out, and I don't know who I am anymore, or necessarily where I belong. And because the episodes did that, it felt like more than just, and now we're going to fight the Klingons. Woo!
It's interesting what you bring up, because this may be a subject for another show too. One of the reasons I think Deep Space Nine and Next Gen were able to do sort of war stories so intimately, because we were still at the tail end of models and miniatures, so they could only show so much, right? Because now with CG, you can just have these CG battles that go on forever and do anything. So it's less about the people, and it's more about the spectacle of the space battles. And I think by necessity, these shows had to be about the characters, because they could only show so much of the space battles.
Yep.
Which culminates with Sacrifice of Angels, which is just, obviously spectacular. And by the time you get to the end of Deep Space Nine, they are using CG, and the space battles are getting bigger, but it never lost sight of, like, it has to be filtered through the eyes of our characters, which is great. The Visitor, remarkable show. It's funny. I went and I went to Memory Alpha just to brush up, and of course, and this is not a criticism, everything about it was quotes from stuff I wrote. Like, I was literally reading, like, from articles and Cinefantastic and books I wrote, and I'm like, I didn't even remember. Like, it was so funny that I had to go to Memory Alpha to reread what I wrote 30 years ago or whatever to refresh my memory for the show. It's bizarre.
That is so meta, dude.
It was very meta, and it's funny because if they didn't have attribution, I would have no idea that was from my stuff.
Amazing.
I would not know it was me, but it was like I was reading stuff like, that's really interesting, and it's like Mark A. Altman, Cinefantastic, Mark A. Altman, 50-year mission, whatever, and it's like and it's like
that guy.
Fascinating. Okay. Amazing episode. You had the chance to sit down with the director, David Livingston, Cirroc Lofton, who, of course, played Jake Sisko, and Michael Taylor, the original writer on the episode. It did also, Renee Echeverria contributes to an uncredited rewrite as well, and did some heavy lifting there as well. But what a remarkable group of people. And it's so interesting to hear David talk about it, because, of course, he loved doing spectacle. He loved doing big action shows. And when, through the luck of the draw, because originally Rene Auberjonois was supposed to direct it, he ends up with this episode, and he didn't know what he had. He was horrified. It was like, oh my God, I'm doing this Talking Heads, and now, of course, it's his favorite episode he ever directed, but he didn't know what he'd gotten, and I love that. I just think that's great.
Yeah, and I got that sense from him, like, on stage, like he was kind of reliving, that experience of getting this and having no idea how to do it. Not even how to do it justice, but how to do it. And then, the way he talks about how he found it and kind of what he put into the process. And I look back and I think, what? He was kind of, the perfect guy to do it, because as much as we talk about Visitor as being a more intimate episode of DS9, it feels And this is partly a product of the sweep of time and the premise, but it feels like it has an epic scope to it.
Yes,
But,
it does.
it feels like one of those. It feels like a really big, great science fiction story that doesn't have to have warring civilizations to make it work. It just needs to have a big idea that's really consistently conveyed, doesn't require a ton of technobabble. It all turns on an emotional choice that has a consequence that we can understand with our eyes and not need to have it explained to us.
That's
Just
so
brilliant.
funny because I was just thinking something very similar, that time travel often is associated with Edith Keeler must die, or we got to stop the Borg before they destroy humankind. These big stakes. And this uses time travel in a way that's the smallest stakes possible, in a way, because it's really about one person, Jake Sisko, and his loss. And Ron Moore got on Next Generation writing a nice episode about loss, the bonding. It's certainly not in my top 10 or 25. It's a good solid double, good episode. Well told. It clearly well written. But The Visitor is just just something really special about loss, and about again, like I said at the beginning, a relationship between a father and a son, which has special resonance. It had different resonance for us when we first watched it, not having kids at the time, and then obviously now. But I would say that it was just as impactful then as it is now. It's just more emotional now.
Yeah, oh, completely, and emotional in different ways. I mean, and it's just we talk about that too, on stage, about how we experienced it then versus how we experience it now, and the kind of the eyes that we bring to it. And I think it's a testament to the genius of that script, and also just the performances in it. I mean, Avery is so great. He is so great in that episode. It's one of his best. And it seems like on some level he doesn't have a lot to do, right? He just kind of stands there and like in the beam, and he talks to Jake. But that limit brings out the best in him in some ways, because he has to really make it sing in just within this confinement. And the way that Tony Todd brings Jake to life, right, is just it's heartbreaking. That was the hardest part of doing that on stage.
Tony not being there, and of course we opened it with our interview with Tony from a year before, when he was very ill. It was right before he died, and he talked about how meaningful this episode was. I think it's so interesting that Avery was always at his best, either when he was being a complete badass or in these really small, intimate scenes with Cirroc, or with Dax. These small two-handers with people where it was a deep personal relationship, or he was just being a total badass, like Siege of AR, blah, blah, blah. So, all good. Well, listen, I have to say this is a remarkable interview you did on stage. This is the kind of stuff we're delivering hour after hour, day after bloody day, at Star Trek Las Vegas. I hope you'll join us in 2026, where we'll be doing more spectacular panels like this. But this was really great. I'm glad we're able to share it with you. So without any further ado, stay tuned, listen to the panel, and of course Ashley and I will be back after the panel with a few closing thoughts. And next week we'll be back to talk about going out to sea. And I'm not talking about Brent Spiner and Walter Matthau. I'm talking about DAREN going out on the SS Minnow and enjoying the Star Trek cruise with a bunch of like-minded individuals. So stay tuned, because here comes Nowcon. What is so remarkable is the work that you did in The Visitor as the older Jake Sisko, which is just one of the great hours of television.
That's what people say. Again, going back to my aunt, she had passed away about 3 months before I got that script. I was like, she was my best friend as well as my mentor and my guide. Every summer she made sure I was active in another program, whether it was geography or theater or whatever. And so I was inconsolable. I couldn't speak. I still remember her phone number. And out of the blue, that script came to me. And she whispered in my ear, just honor me. So every mannerism in that thing is based on her. and how she raised me, how she saved me from gang life, how she saved me, saved my soul. And that's where that comes from.
Did you?
Thank you, Aunt Clara.
I mean, it's such a remarkable performance. Did you spend any time with Cirroc to sort of get his mannerisms or a sense of who he was, since you were playing him as an older character?
Yeah, they sent me a bunch of tapes so I could like study him, and I got time to meet him on the set. And he was originally, they had wanted him to do the role, but they felt he didn't have the gravitas, 'cause he was like 18 at the time.
Right.
And he came up to me and he hugged me on the last day of the shoot and said thank you, because it, not only that episode, but it cemented what he and Avery Brooks are doing in their characterizations.
I mean, and that's an episode that people point to all the time, showing the importance of a relationship between a father and son. And you didn't see, you know, an African-American father and son portrayed in that way on many television shows at the time.
Any television show.
And Star Trek doesn't necessarily get the credit it deserves for depicting that. And it's just such a beautiful, beautiful story written by Michael Taylor and an uncredited Ron Moore.
Thank you for remembering his name.
Of course, of course.
David Livingston, who directed the episode.
I know, the best line producer to ever direct. I mean, the line producers are not used. They're worrying about the money usually. But he was a wonderful director. He always gave himself more money than he should have, but it paid off.
You know.
Well, he knows he directed one of the best episodes on Star Trek.
He did.
So
That's the best thing he ever did.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
yeah, it's
So,
beautiful.
That
That was a hell of a shoot, though. Speaking of makeup, the last day we shot was on a Sunday. My call time is at 1 a.m. in the morning, and the makeup took 6 hours.
Wow. So it was more difficult to get into the elder Jake Sisko
Oh, yeah,
makeup than the current.
It was the wig, all that stuff.
And yet you did this amazing performance through it. So what's the difference between acting without a mask and acting through a mask?
You mean like acting on Andromeda?
Yeah.
It's all part of the training, because whether you have a makeup on or whether you have different clothes on, it's still the human heart that comes through, and that's all we try to do. Heart and soul.
Hey, everybody. I'm still Ashley Miller, and this is still the Inglorious Treksperts stage. And what an amazing interview. It was just incredible to be a part of that. And we've got a really great panel for you today. Just an incredible collection of people who can talk about, what I've said often, and we'll say again, I think is one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine ever made, one of the greatest Star Trek episodes ever made. One of the greatest hours of science fiction entertainment ever made, and we're just going to bring these guys out here. We're gonna talk, and I invite you, like when we get towards the end, we'll give you a signal. You come up, ask questions, but let's just start with the director, David Livingston. Let's sit here. This is great. Yep. Yeah, just sit right here. Like well, you got to be in the center chair. You're the director. Oh, you want to put Cirroc there? Okay, that's fine. Okay, well, in that case, Cirroc Lofton. You may know him as Jake Sisko. Welcome. And somebody left their purse on the couch. So if we get somebody from backstage to come and collect it, that would be great. I don't think it's mine. And last but not least, the author of this incredible adventure, tragedy, Michael Taylor.
I like that. Last but not least, and yet director and actor still get top billing. I think this is just the Hollywood story has not changed.
Yeah.
But I
So
love this guy.
let's talk about Tony first, since we led with that. Again, incredible actor, incredible human being. My favorite Tony story was I had him on an episode of Andromeda. I went to lunch with him to talk about what he was doing, and what he wanted to talk about was playing video games. And at the time, he was really into playing Hitman. And what he loved most about Hitman was all the different ways you could kill someone, which he described in loving detail at lunch. So you could strangle someone, you could stab them in the eye, you can shoot them. I'm like, we're sitting at lunch and this is Tony Todd. But again, like one of the
Did
sweetest.
he say what happens if you say Hitman 3 times while facing
Oh yeah,
down?
he actually appears, which is crazy. Like your mirror turns to blood. That was weird. I still do that now whenever I want to have a conversation with him from beyond the veil. So I mean, all of you, like, tell me what your experiences were with Tony in this episode. Cirroc, particularly you, because you were. There had to have been some collaboration between the two of you in terms of Tony understanding, who Jake was in the moment in time that the episode takes place contemporaneously with the rest of Deep Space Nine, and who Jake becomes. What was that process like for you?
Well, the first time I met Tony, it was on the set, and he kind of tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around and I saw Tony Todd, and he's a very imposing person. He's size-wise, I think he's like 6'6" or something.
Easy. Yeah.
He was a very big guy, and also Candyman had already been out, and he was famous for that, and I knew him for that as well. So I was actually scared of him when I first met him. I said, "What the hell is Candyman doing here?" And then he said, "Well, I'll be playing you," and I thought, Candyman is playing Jake when he grows up. So that was part of just my processing all of it. And what he did was he just said, "I'll be sitting off to the side and I'll watch you perform so I can see your mannerisms and pick up on your demeanor and things." And he did that. And I think Tony Todd, rest in peace, did a fantastic job in this episode and really carried a heavy weight in this episode, playing the older Jake. And what really comes across to me in his performance is the chemistry that he was able to create with Avery and kind of duplicate the Jake-Avery connection, the Jake Sisko, Benjamin Sisko connection. And, just a little backstory on that. Avery and Tony Todd had worked together before this episode. If I'm not mistaken, they worked on A Man Called Hawk years ago. And so they already had this experience of working together. They already had some kind of, working relationship. And so I believe that made it a lot easier. And let me also give credit to Avery, because in the moments in those final scenes, the way he looked at Tony Todd was with the same passion that he would look at me. And so I thought Avery did a fantastic job of seamlessly making it believable for that this Jake was also his son. So that also goes a lot of credit for Avery's performance.
Did that performance from Tony, or the way the episode came together as a whole, did it have an impact on you going forward in terms of how you played Jake, or how you and Avery related to each other in a scene?
Well, the biggest impact for me was having to visualize, because as an actor, you're going to put yourself in the mental state of whatever the scene is requiring. And, what you wrote, made me have to go to a place where I have to envision losing my dad, kind of over and over again. But so getting prepared mentally for that puts you in a really, down, dark place where you're having to visualize that. And that prepared me as far as just getting to a place that was that deep in order to be able to get the performance that we needed.
Right. I mean, so David, when the casting happened, were you were part of that? Was that all from top down? Ira, being Ira, was that? How did that go?
A little background. We talked to Cirroc about playing old Jake, and we did a makeup test and had a lot of discussions about it. But it was finally decided that we should probably go with an older actor, and we were having a big problem trying to figure out who was going to play this incredible part. And I remember, literally an hour and a half ago, I called Ron Surma, who was the casting associate to Junie Lowry, and I asked him to verify and do a fact check on something. And he lives in Las Vegas now. I said, you should come on over here and join the panel. But I said, my recollection is that you and I were standing outside the casting trailer, and I was saying, who are we going to get to play older Jake? And he looked at me and he said, how about Tony Todd? And I said, I don't really know him. I had not seen Candyman, and I didn't know him as an actor. But that was the genesis for Tony being on the show. So this is my shout out to Ron Surma, because that was his idea. And the rest is history. So thank you, Ron.
So
Yeah, thank you, Ron. He also cast me, too. So
He also cast Cirroc. And
yeah, thank you, Ron. Thank you, Junie.
yeah, Junie Lowry and Ron Surma were up from the beginning on The Next Generation and kept going and going. Amazing people who, they knew everybody. And thank you for Cirroc.
the casting on those shows was just insane. I think particularly like on Deep Space Nine, the people that you guys would constantly find to come in and play characters who could have been throwaways turned into regulars. I mean, that's
Andy
a tribute to the
Robinson.
writing and the acting. But yeah, Andy Robinson, exactly. Who acted his way onto a show. And if anybody here saw War of the Worlds on Friday night, you got a taste of how that's possible. So, when you started prepping, this particular episode, I mean, did it hit you when you read the script how delicate some of this was going to be, how emotional some of this was going to be?
I was not supposed to direct this episode. It was supposed to be directed by Renee Aubergenois. Renee had a theater background. Who could be more perfect to direct this piece? But Colm Meaney's schedule, he was doing a feature in England, and it conflicted with what we were going to be doing, so I got assigned The Visitor. And I've always wanted to ask Ira Behr and Rick about whether they were concerned about having me direct that particular episode, because I was not known for my subtlety. And if anything, The Visitor needed subtlety. So my main job as a director was just to get out of the way. And I'm just so grateful to have been able to do that magnificent piece of writing. All of us in this room, are only here because of the word. And this guy is the guy that wrote the words. And what's so wonderful about Treksperts is it's talking about behind the scenes. So there's recognition for the creative powers that make this all happen, that allow us to do our jobs. But in the beginning was the word, and thank you, J.D. Salinger, right?
That's a pretty good segue
Yes.
into that
Yeah.
development process.
And just and you're going to talk about it, but this is crazy. This is how stuff happens. But go for it, Michael.
yeah.
Well, the J.D. Salinger aspect of it, I had read that he gave very few interviews, if any, but one that he did give was to a high school newspaper reporter. And I thought, what if someone like that, someone of that age, sought him out, someone who was a fan of his fiction? And that became that dialogue, the present-day dialogue. That was the foundation, sort of the through line of that episode. But yeah, that was just one of the things that sort of factored in to that story.
Well, one of the things that's, I think, most remarkable about that story and about that script is, it is both a story of a son losing his father. It's also the story of a father losing his son. And it's just incredibly affecting. It's incredibly powerful. Every moment where Sisko disappears is powerful. But the very end of that, my God, I remember watching that, crying like a baby. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to pull off. And, in my experience, when writers find material like that, we're bringing it from somewhere. Sometimes it emerges immediately, Athena-like from Zeus's head. Other times there's a process behind it. What else were you accessing, other than the J.D. Salinger of it all, which is really super fascinating? What really brought you to this story?
Well, that J.D. Salinger aspect was more of a plot issue. It came
Sure,
later.
of course.
What it first started with was this sort of wonderful but maudlin Harry Chapin song, "Cats in the Cradle," that was somehow on the radio a bunch, even though it was an older song. And it's about a father whose son is growing up, and he never has time for him. Keeps saying, "We'll get together then. We'll do something then." And then his, what the fuck? I don't think this is going to work, but let's see.
That's great. So that's your starting point.
That's fabulous.
And what happened then? Where did it come from after
Actually, I saw Mark Moran do this on a comedy special, playing a Taylor Swift song he thought he was dying to. But it's, the son then grows up. His father never has time for him.
Right.
And keeps promising to get together. And now his son is an adult and has no time for his dad. And the dad finds he's alone, sort of, as he's growing older. And he has the sort of dark realization, my son grew up just like me. And I thought it was very emotional. And then I had to think about it and think, wait, that's nothing like my relationship with my dad. Why the hell am I tearing up about this shit? But nonetheless,
I'm not crying, you're crying.
it stayed with me. And I thought, well, it's also thinking, I think, of just snapshots. And, you look back at a scrapbook or something, and you see pictures of your father, your son, and they're separated by gaps of time. At least they were before we recorded every single fucking second. But back then when I wrote this, I was pre-digital, and you took pictures. And I thought, well, what if this wasn't a choice or a failing of character to not be there for your son or for your dad? What if between a loving relationship, something interceded and made it happen that way, forced characters into this situation? And then, of course, with Star Trek, we had something called the subspace anomaly, which is basically like an all-purpose, create a story kind of gag. Whatever goes, it's like Vegas, frankly. Whatever happens in a subspace anomaly happens in a subspace anomaly. And so that became sort of the vehicle, the sort of MacGuffin to make that story work. And the difference is that this was a story of two characters who were dedicated to each other. And it became powerful in that way. And the idea of a son, in a way, outliving his father, but in this case, reverse, the father outliving the son. There was just a lot of powerful stuff to play around with. And what the show offered, more than just some technobabble explanation of how something like this could work, is such a wonderful relationship, which you and Avery had nurtured over, I think, 3 seasons. This was the 4th season, I think, by that point. And you guys were able to make that real. And of course, David, you made it happen.
No, you weren't, at the time when you wrote the script, you weren't on staff. This was your first sale,
No,
right?
I was a freelancing this from New York. It was the first pitch I had sold. And I like to say it's all been downhill from there.
Well,
but
when you write one of the the greatest episodes of television ever written, it always kind of is downhill from there.
But So and as a result, I came out to L.A. to break the episode with the staff, but I was not on set. I did not get to meet Tony Todd then, and I think actually the first time I met him, and not in person, but was on a Zoom panel we all did just not that long ago, not that long before he passed away. It was wonderful to see him. But I came to that episode was a writer, but also as way as a fan, seeing this is how it is realized. This is what these actors and our director brought to it. That was, just threw me for a loop.
So how did it, from the script that you originally wrote, that you sold, that development process that it went through, that incredible Deep Space Nine writer's room, through Ira Behr, through all those guys, how did the script evolve? How did the story evolve as it went towards the stage?
Well, the story kind of, was somehow fairly evolved before it even became a script. The bones of it were there. And in a way, it's really a series of character scenes. So it evolved in the way of fleshing out the characters and the moments, and then the fun of seeing a group of our stars older, going on this mission. Let's dust off the Defiant and get out there again, get the band together. And of course, in the rest of the series, the band was together the entire time. But this kind of a story gave you a chance to leap ahead and imagine a future. And I think it was Captain Nog. We had all sorts of fun stuff that, made that future part of it also really fun and engaging. And that happened in the writer's room, the sketching out of it. And I think as a freelance writer, having sold my first pitch, getting to write the script, I was a little taken back by the seeming cavalierness of the writer's room, saying, we could do this, we could do that, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Now we're going to do this. And I thought, but it's a story, but it just kept getting better and kept evolving. And it wasn't because anyone had any disrespect or lack of respect for the story. It's because that was the process of this writer's room and every good one, which is nothing other than the essence of the story that you don't want to compromise and only enhance is that precious that you can't think of ways to improve it, to bring it more to life.
Yeah, I like to say that I don't even like to call scripts anymore. I just refer to them as the document, just so that I don't get attached to things that I think I think are precious. But even then, there's always a moment when you're writing, when you're creating, and I think this goes for any of whether you're acting or directing, when something is truly working. When you're in that part of your process and you go, oh, crap, like this is working. This is a thing. This is something. Was there a moment like that for you when you were writing this? Like, when did that come? What was that moment for you when you understood that you had really stuck the landing?
Honestly, when I watched the show.
Perfect answer.
Until then, seeing it all come together as a story which moved me, just, maybe had something to do with its creation, and yet seeing it, it was a weird thing to be, saying, oh, I wrote that, but also, I'm a fan of that. It exists outside of you once you, put it out there, because then it becomes part of a process, a deeper collaboration, and ultimately, it's, becomes something organic, that is a story you can just appreciate on your own.
Yeah, and I want to add,
Yeah, for sure.
just kind of going back to a question you asked a little bit ago, and about the script itself. We do 26 episodes in a season, and there's episodes that you get that are, average, I would say. They're not spectacular.
They're the meat and potatoes episode.
Yes, sometimes they're called filler episodes because you're trying to fill up some space between the great episodes.
Yeah.
And I remember getting this script and reading it in my trailer, and I think it's the first and maybe only time that I can remember tears dripping off of my face as I was reading the script. It was hard to read the script because it was just so emotional. And as I see Michael talking about it, he started to get choked up when he started to think about the base of the emotional premise of this script, right?
Do you remember, what was the first moment that you read that you had that emotional reaction to?
It keeps going.
Yeah.
It keeps going. I mean, first the initial, losing that initial loss, and then the kind of reliving that over and over again is what makes it so crazy. But I remember tearing up reading this script. I remember saying, this is going to be a fantastic episode. And I also remember wanting to be the older Jake. So the process of me trying to put on the prosthetics and the makeup and age myself, like I was up for that because I wanted the challenge of playing the older Jake. But then when they finally put all of the stuff on, I could see for myself that I wasn't believable as a 70-year-old or whatever, And so it made sense for them to go the direction of getting Tony Todd. But when it comes down to reading a script and feeling a script, there's some that are over and above and beyond the average scripts. And now as I watch The Next Generation, I'm seeing those episodes as they come out. Measure of a Man and Yesterday's Enterprise and these kinds of episodes that just are exceptional. They're just outstanding. They're better than the other ones. And this is one of those episodes. The Visitor is one of the best episodes we did on that show. And
one of the things that I think, well, you know what? I'll say it's the most extraordinary thing about this episode. The great episodes of Star Trek always age well. The Visitor has aged incredibly well, but for me as a viewer, it's aged I think in a way that's quite unique and different from my other experiences with Star Trek episodes. As a young man, I'm in college and I'm watching this episode, and I had the same reaction, watching it that you had reading it, you had watching it. It affected me deeply. I mean, I'm crying through most of that episode, and I am destroyed by the end of it. But as a young man, I am watching that, and I am thinking, how terrible, to be Jake Sisko. How awful that must be. And as an older man, not that old, but as an older man, as a father, I watch it, and I feel all that, but I have a completely different experience. I experience it as Ben Sisko. You have these hopes, these expectations for your children. You want them to be things. You want them to do things with their lives. And I don't know that I fully appreciated, like with the breadth of what that episode was. I think until I had children, and I understood the real tragedy of it, and what drove everything, and how awful it was, that Jake had put his whole life into just undoing that one moment of sadness. And Michael, that's really, again, that's extraordinary that you pulled that off.
It's interesting. I mean, what you're saying, and it's something I thought about last night, even posted about, because it occurred to me in a way that I hadn't really appreciated before. I wrote it, as a story. In the same way a song can make you cry and you realize it's got nothing to do with your actual relationship or your life, I wrote that as a story. And one of the things that's wonderful about Star Trek is the characters are very specific and brought to life by brilliant cast and directors, but they're also archetypes in a way. The father, the son, and that's a template, you could relate to. And I wrote that story having a father, who will later pass away, but not that relationship, a better one. But it didn't really hit me in the same way until I had a son. And that was just a few years ago. And he was just out. I think my wife had to take him out because he was crying out for dada. So in the back there, But exactly, that's what makes it real. And it made it real for me again, in just recent years.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, so David, your job, look, sometimes you're directing television and you're a traffic cop, right? And you came from line producing. You're the ultimate traffic cop, right? You're the stop sign. You're the lights. You're everything. And here you are, and you've got this incredible script. You've got this incredible cast. I know you said that you thought, my God, I'm not the right guy for this. Were there moments in that script? What was the scene for you that terrified you most as a director?
Every scene. When I read the script, I remember sitting in the office reading it, and I finished it, and I was terrified. I went over to Steve Oster's office, who replaced me as the supervising producer or producer on the show, and I said, Steve, I don't know what to do with this. It's all talk. It's not Star Trek. I don't understand this. I don't get it. Help me. I'm so afraid this is going to end my directing career. It's over. He said, David, he was very stern when he said it. He said, David, go home and read the script again. So I went home, and my son, and you know Brian, he was 17 at the time, and I looked over at him, and I got it. I'm a little slow on the uptake, sorry. But I got it. And again, you guys are pointing out, it's one of those scripts where everybody knew how special it was. Every department rose to the occasion. Jonathan West's photography was extraordinary in the episode. Talking about post-production, Dennis McCarthy wrote an elegiac score. I mean, it is so powerful and moving. And I had not, when you do the show and you do your director's cut and stuff, you don't get you don't get the music. And then when I saw the show on the air with that music, it added an incredible element to it. So all of the departments, again, rose to the occasion because we all ultimately knew how special that material was.
And the thing about the music, I think it's a great point. And honestly, for Star Trek, for that era of Star Trek, that's rare. The music was always great. It's my God, it's like Jay Chataway, Ron Jones, like Dennis McCarthy, all those guys. They're brilliant. But there was a house style. It was the house musical wallpaper, and there are very few true exceptions to that, right? Like I can Tin Man, Best of Both Worlds. It's The Visitor, and it's just I can hear it. Like I can still hear that moment as well as I can see it. Like all of the things that you're talking about, like bring that episode back to life for me. And it's a testament, I think, to how great the material was that everybody kind of said, you know what, let's let this be what it is.
I'm not saying that we didn't treat every episode as an A episode.
Oh, of course, right.
But the material demanded it. If we were going to be artists, then we had to recognize what a piece of art was on the page. And what can we do in our individual disciplines to make sure that we take and translate what's on the page into what we do. What can I do? What can I do with the camera to make sure that I deliver the emotional impact that Michael has written? That's our job. It's to interpret it in our different departments to fulfill that emotional and the emotional power of the piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of, Rick being, I think, very cautious about not wanting episodes to be over the top, to oversell things. And I think with an episode like that, it's just, it speaks for itself. It totally speaks for itself.
I also want to give a little shout out to David Livingston because he's too humble to toot his own horn. He's the most prolific director in Star Trek, ladies and gentlemen. David Livingston has directed more episodes than anybody. So when he says he's going to end my directing career, yeah, that didn't happen. You did pretty well for yourself.
No,
yeah, I mean, and just one of the joys to work with because he puts so much thought into the work. He's not showing up to just get a check. He's showing up to do the work as best he can, and that involves a lot of preparation with David. He's always mapping out what he's going to do beforehand with this energy and enthusiasm that's just palpable and contagious.
Yeah.
Being in show business is a gift. And Rick Berman gave me a gift of being able to direct. I have never been happier and more fulfilled in my professional life than being on a stage. It is the most gratifying and uplifting experience I've ever had. And I am so grateful. We are here. In a couple of years, I will have been on, hopefully I'm still around, I will have been on Star Trek for 40 years. I started on the show on The Next Generation in 1987. And look at all you wonderful people out there who we're all still connected with. And we're talking about an episode of television. It's absolutely extraordinary. And I am so grateful to be here and to be talking to you. And I love doing the podcast and all that stuff. It is such a rush for me to do it. So gratitude.
Amen.
So if you all have questions, you can start to line up. We'll start taking them. We're gonna go to the hour because it's my goddamn stage.
And also I want to say really quickly also, Michael, when I watched this episode recently to review it for my podcast. Now, we did it 30 years ago. I was in it. I've seen it before. But we watched it for the review. And in the review, watching it, I'm just tearing up, right? And I'm like, I know what's going to happen, And still, it just, you can't escape that emotional feeling of what it means to kind of get your message on to the people you love. Right, and really express how you feel to them and how you feel about them. And when you hear it and see it, I've had people say it's one of my favorite episodes, but I can't watch it.
Yeah. I mean, I have to tell you, I've done a lot of these panels. We've done a lot of podcast episodes. We talked about a lot of Star Trek. I don't know if you guys know or not, but we've got a podcast. And this has honestly been the most difficult conversation that I've ever had with anybody on stage because there are just so many emotions that are associated with that episode. It's just that powerful. It just sticks with you that much. I mean, just speaking as a fan, thank all of you for what you did in bringing this story to life. So do we have anybody back here who'd like to ask something? Okay, go for it.
First of all, thank you. It's because of you guys I'm a writer to this day, so thank you.
Right.
This question is for David. When you have this type of emotional episode, how do you choose the camera angles and that sort of thing? How to shoot it? How do you choose that? Thank you.
So what he's really looking for is, how do you match the visual storytelling to the emotional content of the page?
Hi, Victor. How are you, man?
Good to see you.
You read this, you read the script, and you have to adapt and tell the story with the camera to be truthful to that scene. So again, how do you use the camera to interpret and bring the emotional life of the words forward? So you don't want to do glitzy, fast camera moves and crazy crane shots and all that kind of stuff that I love to do in The Visitor. You be true to the material. That's probably the best way I can state it.
Thank you.
Hi there. As someone who recently lost their grandfather back in January, it really resonated with me, and I was wondering, with the reuse of the All Good Things uniform and badge that later appear in Timeless and Endgame, there seems to be a thematic overtone of wronging the tragedies of the past. Has that ever been, really connected amongst any of you? Like, is that intentional amongst all the series, when in the latter with Voyager especially?
That's interesting. I think these shows typically had long lives. 7 seasons, hardly anything gets that anymore. And 26 episodes a year, these original spin-offs of the original show. I think over the course of that amount of time, the characters are experiencing a lifetime. There's a sense of real time in it. And as a fan watching with these characters, you're going through your own life and experiencing with them. And I think maybe that is part of it. It's sort of organic to the nature of these shows, that time is an important factor, and not just in terms of a science fiction trick. We go back, we go to the future, we go to the past. The time travel that matters is the memories that you have of these characters and other episodes, and then as as the shows have ended and we've moved on, we have that same relationship to that. So maybe, I'm speaking off the cuff here, but I think maybe that's a real idea, that time is just an element that is crucial to these shows because it's crucial to human life. And I forget who said it. I don't know, it was Nabokov or another writer. It said the subject of every novel is time. It's kind of what defines us. There's a beginning and an end. Same with these shows, these characters.
Yeah, and I'll add to that a little bit. What we've learned recently from quantum mechanics and quantum physics is that the observer can change what is being happened. So I think all of us as observers are influencing the very thing we are observing. And so I think there's an interesting correlation there.
Bringing our own lives to what we're watching.
Yes.
We've got time for one more quick one.
All right. Great to see everyone, and congrats on one of the best episodes of TV ever made, gentlemen. Cirroc, happy birthday. I know you had a birthday recently, so happy birthday, sir. I had a birthday recently as well, so happy birthday, man.
Birthday to you. All the other Leos in here.
My question for Cirroc and everyone is, what impact has this episode had on your relationship with your father or your children, if you have any, because it's impacted me a lot. I think about this episode, and I'd like to know what you think as well. Do you feel this episode after the fact, like a lot of us do, I think?
Well, I'm with you that, originally when I read the script and we filmed it, it was from my perspective and my POV as a kid. Losing my dad and what do I do? And, I'm lost in the world without my guidance. And then now as I'm a father myself, I see the value in, her living her life more than I want my life. I'm totally fine that I've lived my life and I'm okay. But I want you now to enjoy your life and have your, destiny and your wishes and your dreams come true. And so once you become a parent, you have already become second place now in your life. You're no longer the priority, and you will easily sacrifice yourself in exchange for their furtherance. And so I believe that, now as an adult and as a father, I look at it like Avery would look at it, as Sisko would look at it, like, don't waste your time trying to, fix my life or chase after me or repair whatever I've done. Move on and blaze your own trail and almost kind of to some degree let go of me. You have to kind of let go. And we all want to see the best for our children, and I think this episode just hits all of those nerves,
Yeah.
Great job, guys. Good job.
So I think we're going to end on that note. That was amazing. Everybody, thank you, David, Cirroc, and Michael. Thank you guys so much. This has been an amazing panel. And the Treksperts will return.
And we're back.
We are.
Again, I really think that's a great panel. I think that's part of why I'm so proud of our programming on the Treksperts stage, is this bringing this kind of programming where it's not just an actor, sitting there, trying to be funny and get laughs, but actually talking about something meaningful. And, David Livingston, who is just a font of knowledge about the history of Star Trek, having been there from the very beginning of Next Generation through, the end of Voyager, and directed a couple of Enterprises, even though he was no longer producing. And then, of course, Michael Taylor, who I first met when I interviewed him for 50-Year Mission. I think he was doing Galactica by then. What a great guy. I find him so fascinating. A punk guy from the village who was in a punk band and, just happened to be in the orbit of Noreen Shanker, who was roommates with Ron Moore and got pulled into Star Trek and then worked on Galactica and did some of the best stuff on Galactica. And then went and ran his own shows for AMC, in turn, Washington Spy. I mean, just a fascinating guy. We were so lucky to have him. And I love that you got to talk to him. And, I'm just been a big fan of Mike Taylor, so I'm so glad he was there. And he was a big fan of the panel and the convention. He didn't know what to expect, and he had a great time.
Yeah, I think that was one of my favorite panels that I was a part of, and I think because on some level it kind of combined all the things. I think we were talking at the beginning of the episode about what we think this podcast does well, and I think it combined a lot of those things. That it was number one, it was a really great interview with people that you otherwise wouldn't be able to hear from, but it was more than an interview. Like, we ended up having a real conversation that went to real places, and we were taking apart in a loving way, analyzing, breaking down, and reappreciating something that's very important to a lot of people. I mean, that audience, that was not an empty theater we were talking to. That was a full theater we were talking to. It's like, and people were very affected by that panel. And I think anytime that we can do that like we can have like these conversations with each other or with our guests about these, incredibly intellectual, big ideas, but bring it down.
And significant episodes. We try every year to spotlight a couple of key episodes. And I think all those panels were packed. We did Best of Both Worlds. We did Visitor, obviously.
Move Along Home.
We did it in Mirror Darkly. No, we never did Move Along Home. Although we are tentatively planning to do Turnabout Intruder this year, because it is, endings and beginnings is our overarching theme. So we want to talk about Turnabout Intruder because there's some great stories about how that episode evolved, which is interesting. It's funny because Rachel Robinson is Andy Robinson's daughter, who was in the episode, and we got pitched her for this year for the convention. It's like, yeah, you're 1 year too late. Why didn't you pitch her last year when we did the Deep Space Nine panel? Can't use her this year. We already did the best panel you could do on it. We're not revisiting old ground, but it's
revisiting The Visitor.
Yeah, I would have loved to have had her, as part of that panel. But it's we got the three people that mattered, and of course Tony and Spirit. Having talked to him at GalaxyCon, had a wonderful conversation with him that we excerpted and showed to open the panel. So that was great. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the whole J.D. Salinger of it all. And, we joke about the Blue Bayou in Star Trek 3 and Space Dock being the Blue Bayou. And, of course, The Visitor has another Disneyland illusion. The house is the Haunted Mansion. John Eves had based his on the Haunted Mansion, which is funny. A lot of Disney in that Star Trek.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's it. Well, I'm so glad you joined us for this episode. I'm so glad that we could share this with you, and we'll be doing more of these at Star Trek Las Vegas, and obviously join us at all our convention appearances throughout the coming year. You can follow us and on social. You can go to Linktree/Treksperts Plus, which has all our social channels where you can follow us and follow the show and follow us around be like the Grateful Dead. You can just follow us around the country, just not in a scooter. Just not in a scooter. So yeah, but Darren Dochterman theoretically will be back unless the ship turns into Titanic this week.
That would not be good.
And he'll be, telling us all about the ship, the boat.
Ship
Is it a ship or a boat?
Danger.
Is it a boat or a ship?
It's a ship.
Okay, there you go.
A submarine is a boat.
Yeah, but you work for the Navy, so what's the difference between a ship and a boat?
A boat is a submarine, and a ship is anything on the surface.
Is that right?
Yeah, the Navy anyway. Yeah,
I did not know that.
Yeah,
fascinating. Now, in the Navy, for female officers, did they call them Mr. or Ma'am?
depends. Certainly now, I think, and even like back in the 90s, it's ma'am. But there was a time that was not the case. It just sort of evolved, and I don't know that it ever evolved formally. It just kind of became a thing. But if you wanted to, I mean, that's a really great question. Like, at what point, like, that shifted? I almost need to ask my father-in-law.
Maybe we should do an episode on the influence of the Navy on Star Trek, because clearly, obviously, even though Gene was in the Air Force, Justman was in the Coast Guard, I think. And then, of course, you have Nick Meyer, who didn't serve, but brought the influence of the Navy and Horatio Hornblower to Star Trek in a big way with Star Trek 2. It'd be interesting to talk about that, and we could play the village people in the Navy.
That would be amazing.
I will not play YMCA because, of course, it's Donald Trump's favorite song. So fuck that piece of shit. But I will. But in the Navy would be okay, I guess. Okay. Well, this was great as always. Good to sit down with you and talk about one of our favorite episodes, top 5 episode. Oh, and speaking of which, I'm glad we brought that up. We will soon be launching. This is special.
Lunch. I thought you said lunch.
Yeah, I'm thinking about lunch actually. Our poll. We are going to be doing a massive Star Trek poll, Inglorious Treksperts poll, top 60 episodes of Star Trek of all time, which we will be announcing the results. We'll be announcing who's the big winner. We'll be announcing the results at Star Trek Las Vegas for the 60th. So we'll be doing a 60 greatest episodes of Star Trek poll. We will announce how you can vote in the coming weeks. It's going to be really exciting. We're going to try and get as big a sample as possible. And que sera, sera, what will be, will be. where whatever happens. So we're counting on you to do the right thing, because there's certain series we don't need to see represented, but it's all up to you, not to us. This is where you make the call. So you pick the winner. You pick the winner.
You pick the wiener.
So anyway, okay. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up here, Ash?
Drink your Ovaltine. How's that?
Drink your Ovaltine. Drink your Tang.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then next week, just sit right back and we'll tell you a tale of a faithful ship that started from a traffic port aboard this mighty ship. Not a boat,
Starship. And all I know is I just hope that if it does go all Titanic on Darren, that he finds a door.
Well, women and children. Well, women and children first, and Darren and Treksperts.
And Treksperts. Women and Treksperts first.
We need to get Darren off that ship. Who's going to do the voices on the podcast otherwise? Right. We gotta have Darren. So we're stronger with him than without him. Okay, and on that note, that's it. I'm done here. So thank you, Ashley. Thank you, audience, for being here. And on behalf of Ashley Miller, myself, Mark A. Altman, follow us. And a big thank you to Brian Mix. Oh, speaking of Brian Mix, before we go, if you haven't already supported Land the Shuttlecraft. If you haven't supported Land the Shuttlecraft on Kickstarter, they are doing an amazing job of raising funds as Friends of Ticonderoga to house and create a hangar bay, a shuttle bay for the Galileo. It has been, I don't think anyone could have predicted how successful this campaign would be. It's hugely successful, but there's some great backer awards, and it's for a good cause. They're on their way to getting a volume screen, so like the Galileo will be able to actually fly through the cosmos. Nice. Who knows? Maybe if they raise enough money, they can house the Columbia too.
But they can get a piece of your action.
Yeah, no. So definitely, if you haven't already, go to Kickstarter, Land the Shuttlecraft, and support this wonderful campaign. Big thank you to Brian Mix, our video producer, who is a part of that campaign, a friend of Ticonderoga. You're doing the Lord's work, or I should say, you're doing the Lockwood's work, because he's a god now. So anyway, he's our god. Walk macho. So on behalf of Ashley Miller, myself, Mark A. Altman, until next Thursday with the returning Darren DOCHTERMAN, keep on trekking ingloriously, of course. Now I'm going to get a pizza.